guys, welcome back to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. I am your co-host, Ray Russell, just here along for the ride as we continue to tell and hear the stories of Bob Roop's wrestling career, both in the ring as well as behind the scenes. And this week, guys, it's going to be a good one. We're going to talk all about the Georgia War of the early to mid-1970s. Poor little innocent Ann Gunkel, well, maybe not so innocent, taking on the big bad likes of Buddy Fuller, Lester Welch, and company there in the Georgia territory. In order to have a conversation about this story, we're going to bring back the man himself right now. Please welcome back Mr. Bob Roop.
Well, hey, Ray, and all our fans out there, welcome back. I'm glad to be here with you again. I'm not saying I live for this hour or two on the air every week, but it certainly is a motivation. I better, make sure I'm in good shape and I stay alive long enough to do another week. So, well, it's good to be back.
Yeah, we need you here, Bob. The listeners need you here. I need you here, not for the show, just because, hey, I just enjoy talking to you. And, of course, your kids, your boys, they need you. So, yeah, we got to keep Bob Roop around. Let's keep Bob around for another 80-plus years.
Well, the only reason I can joke about it is because I don't have any reason to be pessimistic about, being around. I plan on being around I've got this and I've got other things. I mean, I'm not in a retirement home sitting in a rocking chair staring out the window. I'm actively engaged and my mind is always working, even if my body is more at rest now than it has been. The mind's still working, making up for it. So, and that part of us thinking about the stuff you and I are going to talk about and share with our listeners out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's get into it.
Sure. Yeah. Last we left off, we were finishing up your tour for the All Japan promotion, the Giant Baba. The final night of the tour, July 25th. It was Baba and Jumbo Tsuruta defeating the team of Bob Roop and Bob Backlund. Still a pretty damn cool team. Hopefully everybody listened to the last episode. They were able to go to YouTube and check that match out. Who knew Bob Backlund and Jumbo Tsuruta, rookies, could pull off a match like that? Really good stuff. All four of you guys really enjoyed that. But as you leave Japan, Bob, July 25th, your final day there, you've told the story, it was many episodes ago now, of your time trying to get back into the country, the continent of Australia, to work for Tony Coloni here in 1974. And of course, that story's out there. I encourage everybody to go back and find it. It was really interesting, and how you walked into the surprised room of Tony Coloni and Bobby Shane, who was booking at the time. And you're back in the country of Australia, I believe, for your third tour there in August of 1974.
Let me break in for a second and just say,
Sure.
I thought of a comment. Most people are working for a way to get out of a country, and I worked real hard. I had to figure out a way to sneak into the country, but legally, I need to figure out a way to get in there legally. I wasn't about to put myself into a shipping container or something.
No, you were just coming there to work. You weren't coming there to build a house. I get you.
Exactly.
Well, I noticed, I don't know if we didn't really go through your matches there last time when we were discussing, because it was more about the story of how you got in there and everything that transpired behind the scenes. But I noticed you were married for a while here, for the little bit of time you were here in the summer, to Mario Milano, who was a big name in the Australia territory. You guys are working amateur rules matches, which lead ultimately to brass knuckles matches. Yeah, my how things change, right? I mean, we're doing amateur rules. This is my way. This is Bob Roop rules, I'm assuming. And of course, it's going to break down and lead into a lot of no DQ matches between you two.
Well, yeah, Mario was, he was the nicest guy in person, and he came across. He wasn't like a baby face, like a heel turn baby face, where he had a vicious streak, but he was over, and plus he had a built-in fan base of Italian. A lot of Italian immigrants, or maybe they've been there 3 or 4 generations by this time, who in every major city there was a block of them. It's like a New York. Sydney and Melbourne are like New York and Chicago. You have people, you have heavy.
Right, just like the Greeks with Spiros there in Australia as well, right?
Yeah, the ethnic contingent and big in numbers that'll come. So Spiros always had a following. And I think that to Bobby Shane was booking. I think to his credit, he saw a way, because I was over a little bit. I think I'd been there before. So I think to his credit, he saw a way to try to draw some money with me and Mario, because Mario, of course, had been over and stayed over. But probably if he was still around, I don't know if he's still alive, but if he was still working today, he would still be over. Just all the grandparents had come out of the nursing homes to come see him. Yeah, he and I getting into a series of matches made sense because both of us him being really over, and by me just being paired with him, it's kind of like when Sullivan came into San Francisco and challenged me, as that by putting all this backstory in there, just making it up, I got Kevin over right away. I mean, within a week or two. And it's the same thing by putting me with Mario in Australia and having our competitive, our battle, our fight, our feud get so intense in just a few weeks.
Yeah, I'm looking at the results. I didn't mean to cut you off, Bob. It kind of goes in line with what you said, though. Bobby Shane trying to find something for you to do because nobody knew you were going to show up. You show up. The first date I had for you here was August 17th for TV, and then later in the evening you work Melbourne. But just a week later, you begin this storyline here with Mario Milano with the amateur rules stuff for a $500 wager. So somebody putting some money up there. And then it looks like you guys are going to do that in a few cities before you go straight into those brass knuckles, tape fists, no DQ, no stopping for blood matches that you guys have for the next several weeks. So yeah, you're only there about a week before it begins. So they certainly found something for you to do almost immediately.
I had not ever had a feud with either Mario or Spiros. Like me against them for like 4, 5, 6 weeks in a town. I go back every week with the series of escalating matches, tape fists and cage and all that sort of thing. And to his credit, I don't remember the matches. I don't remember the tape fist. I don't remember a thing about it, which means they were good. But I do remember this. I was in my top form at the time. I just been in Japan and had been working hard over there, and I was working really, really hard to get over. I was doing things, the thing that Ric Flair did where he hits the corner and he flips over, does the flip. Well, I saw Harley Race do that in Florida, and I copied it. So at that time, I was down about 225, 230, and I was able to do it. I was in good shape. I mean, when you got to weigh 270 and about 40 pounds of it's in your butt, it's sometimes hard to get that butt over that top rope. But being smaller and more in better shape and more agile and lighter, I was doing those kind of bumps, being slammed off the top rope, off the corner, getting ready to jump on somebody, have them slam me. I was doing stuff like that was getting over in my matches. And I don't know if I said it when we, on our original episode, but even after I'd given my notice, I worked harder than ever, to make them realize what they were missing. And Coloni came to me before. I think I might have said this, but I'm not trying to pat myself on the shoulder or the back here. But Coloni came to me and just he tried to initiate a renegotiation by saying he just said, "I wish you weren't leaving." And if I'd been smart, I'd have just said, "Well, pay me what I had coming, and I'll stick around." But I think I was still pissed off at being his initial treatment of me had kind of soured the well, so to speak. So
yeah, just a refresher for everybody who maybe hasn't heard that other episode. You walk in, you're guaranteed, you thought you were guaranteed X amount of dollars, and Coloni calls you after the initial discussion that you had with him when you walked in and said, "Hey, I'm Bob Roop. I'm here. I'm ready to make, my money. I'm ready to do the work for you in the ring." And then he calls you a little later and says, "I'm not giving you X amount of dollars. It's going to be much less than that." And so you were working, I guess, on that, and you were busting your butt, proving yourself to Coloni, and of course getting over on TV and with the fans in the arenas for about a month. You're working basically almost always with Mario Milano. There's some other matches in between as well. But you're only there about, like you said, a month, and you leave town in the middle of September. So you were not happy, and I guess Tony Coloni had the opportunity. You talk about, well, maybe I should have said, "Hey, if you want me to stick around, just give me what you promised me or what I was promised." But he also had the opportunity to make an offer at the same time. So, it goes both ways. If you're leaving town and I consider you, a credit to my promotion, then as an owner, as a promoter, I should be the one extending my hand. Hey, what can we do to keep you around here? And it seemed like he didn't want to go that extra mile. Maybe he couldn't afford it. You talked about in the past, you think he might have sold automobiles or something like that on the side, and this was kind of his side gig that he bought into. It never really took off like it did, obviously, for Jim Barnett in the past, but he's trying here. He's got some decent talent in here working with you, but it just doesn't last long, Bob. You're gone by the middle of September. You're only there, like I said, a month.
I'm trying to, let me interrupt here for a second.
Sure.
I'm trying to think why it would take a month, and the facts of what happened came to it. I made a tape and sent it to I had a little recorder, and I made a tape and I mailed it to Eddie Graham. So that probably took a week to 2 weeks to get there from Australia. I don't know if I realized that it would take so long. So it took about a week or maybe even 10 days before Graham got that and called me. And then after he called me, because if I would give my notice, it was only going to be for 2 weeks. Because if I wanted to leave a place, I would like to leave that day if I could. You know, if you're unhappy, you give your notice and you still got to go back. And now, even worse, usually because you're leaving, you got to. I don't mind doing jobs. That was my work. That was my purpose, was to get beat. But you know, you're getting beat by everybody every night. Which again, it's not ego or anything, but I enjoyed making matches more competitive. By that time, knowledgeable fans will have an idea what's going on when they see all of a sudden you start losing. You'll have fans even saying, "Oh, sorry you're leaving, Bob. We're enjoying having you here." And another observation that just came to me, that's the reason I offer them. They only come to me now, was that what you said, Colony was a mark to wrestling. But some of the things they did to him, King Curtis getting him to fly him back to Maui to get a new supply of pharmaceuticals, let's put it that way, have Colony pay for it, shows that the ability those guys had to swerve him and, you know, to manipulate him. So I'm not sure he knew how to talk to me as like Barnett would have. He was letting Shane handle all that, I think, because he was uncomfortable probably with the wrestlers. If he was a wrestling fan, he would be a little bit intimidated. Anyway, I wanted to add that. Let's go back to where you were.
No, that was totally in line with what we were discussing here. So you give your notice. You're there for basically a month-ish, and you leave the territory. You weren't there very long working for Tony Coloni, but some fun matches in between while you were there. And then you head back to your homestead of the United States of America. You're coming back to work for the old Georgia Championship Wrestling territory. At this point, I believe some of the hands in the pot here as you come back in the latter half of 1974. I believe your first match that I have documented, September 21st. I believe a lot of the guys that were promoting at this point in time in control of Georgia were the likes of Buddy Fuller, Lester Welch. I know Paul Jones always had a little piece of the pie. I've read that Eddie Graham might have had something in there. And of course, Jim Barnett is there as well. And you've already dealt with Jim Barnett repeatedly, and you're going to deal with him again right here. Now, before we get into your time in the ring here and things that went on backstage behind the scenes while you were part of the Georgia War, I wanted to go back and give a little history lesson, just going to kind of run through it a little bit and get your take, because I know you've done some digging and you have some opinions and thoughts on some of this as well, and kind of give everybody just a quick overview of how this whole thing began.
Okay.
All right, guys, so we're going to go back to August of 1972. Co-promoters, well, we'll actually go back a little bit before that. Ray Gunkel, wrestling talent, one of the top baby faces of the territory there in Georgia, was one of the promoters of the Georgia territory. He owned something like 41% of the stock. And another fellow by the name of Don McIntyre was his co-promoter, who also owned pretty much equal stock. Well, at some point, McIntyre decided he was getting out of the game, and without even confronting Ray, from my understanding, sells his stock, Don McIntyre does, to a guy by the name, and we've talked about him before here on the show, a guy by the name of Buddy Fuller, the father of the Tennessee stud Ron Fuller, Robert Fuller, of course. And Buddy comes in, takes over McIntyre's stakes in the company, and he becomes equal partners with Ray Gunkel. Problem is, these two do not get along. It's like oil and water, Bob. So the story goes. Now, Paul Jones was there, not the wrestler, but the promoter, Paul Jones. I think he only had like 10 to 12% of the stock, but they used him as the figurehead and kind of just to go over things, because remember, Buddy Fuller and Ray Gunkel were wrestlers. So they didn't necessarily want to put out that, hey, we're the guys running these shows. So Paul Jones was kind of looked at as sort of a figurehead, but he also had that stake in there. Well, as time went on,
let me interrupt you. Point out something. With Fuller having and Gunkel having equal shares of, say, 40, I think it was, like you said, 42% or 43%.
I'm looking right now. It looks like it was 41% each, so that's 82.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's 18 points out of 100, 18 shares. Now think, for anybody to have a controlling interest, you have to have over 50%. Well, the only way either one of those guys, Gunkel or Fuller, could get over above 50% to where they could take over the company and running the company.
They would need Paul Jones's stock.
That made Paul Jones very important. Mm-hmm. Where Paul wanted to go, and Paul had been there before both these guys. He'd been around for a while. He had an immense power, even though he was a minority shareholder.
Ain't that something?
Yeah.
You're sitting over there owning 41%, but I have equal power at 10% because you need me. It's amazing how business works.
Think if two people had 49% and you had 2%. You're an equal partner in a sense.
Absolutely. They need you.
Exactly. Who you can ask for any job you want if you are willing to vote your 2%. A lot of times the guy who gets voted out, like after Ole took over for Barnett in Atlanta, the whole time I was there 3 years. I never saw Barnett, not even one time. And he was still involved with the company. So, and the only import that has, as we started out, where I went to Atlanta, or after Australia, Barnett was running things. So for him to go from running things to completely disappearing, where you don't see him at all, is quite a shift.
Oh yeah, most definitely. Yeah, things definitely changed for Jim Barnett over time here. He wasn't so much in the office as much. But he's totally there, right? Actually, it was Jim. Well, we'll get to that in a minute. Actually, I don't want to jump ahead. He survived. Oh yeah, we'll talk about.
Jim Barnett always survived. Yeah,
he's like a cockroach, man.
You know what? I was thinking that. I swear to God, I was thinking that like a cockroach.
Didn't want to say it.
Yeah, just as you said. Well, like mines, I agree. Yeah, cockroaches are hard to kill. They've been around like since the dinosaurs.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Jim Barnett always found a way to not just survive, but to thrive for many years anyway, at least up into the 1980s. But so unfortunately, along comes the year of 1972, and on August 1st, it may have been, I believe, Ray Gunkel passes away. He had some heart issues. He gets in the ring, wrestles Ox Baker, and they're going to use that short term to put Ox over as a killer, literally.
Yeah.
So Ray Gunkel sadly passes away, which means his stock goes to whomever's next in line in the Gunkel family, which would be his wife, the beautiful Ann Gunkel.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that doesn't sit well with the big bad men of the NWA. And so I wanted to read just a quick excerpt here from The Assassin, Jody Hamilton's book, another Scott Teal great book. Guys, go check it out.
Yeah, it's great.
So Jody says, an hour or so after Ray's funeral was over, Tom Ernesto, who was one of the original Bolos, and Ray and Jody's partner is The Assassins, and a great booker, Tom Ernesto as well.
Yes.
But he says Tom Ernesto calls Jody an hour after the funeral to tell him who was there. Tom's first words were, "The vultures are beginning to descend on the carcass." Hamilton continued in his book to say, on the afternoon of the funeral, listen to these names, guys, Buddy Fuller, Eddie Graham, Lester Welch, and Paul Jones were in Ray's office, plotting their plan of action. The following day, they closed down Ray Gunkel's ABC Booking Company. Now, that was the promotion, basically. That was the company name, ABC Booking. Ray Gunkel passes away, and they decide, we're just going to shut down the company and open a new one under the name Mid-South Sports, sanctioned by the NWA. So the four of them had minority control and ignored the fact that Ann Gunkel, as Ray's survivor, owned Ray's percentage points. In fact, they neglected to put those percentage points into the new corporation. So they never even offered to buy Ann out. They just said, we're going to shut this down and build a new promotion, and Ann, you're not involved. Amazing.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that it's funny again, I have to take my little shots here when I can. But a guy who Ron Fuller,
Mm-hmm.
has been giving me crap for 30 years about
50 years, 40 years, 45
maybe
years,
40. Yeah, for almost half a century. He's been going out there and giving me crap about, that Bob Roop tried to steal my territory. Yeah, he's a thief and all that. And it wasn't just his father. When Ron was working by this time, Ron and Robert went in there to work with Buddy. So he's involved with a promotion that now they try to do it legally, although there is no illegality in a hostile takeover. If you somehow manage to gain control, short of murdering someone, but if you manage to gain control through manipulation without, now, of course, if you're bribing people, but a lot of times the bribing comes in the form of buying someone's stock for, 20 times what it's worth. That's kind of a bribe, but it's legal. Instead of doing it like we did, which wasn't nothing we did was illegal, but instead of trying to do it like right out of hostile, these guys are saying, no, we'll do it legally. We'll just, I don't know
dissolve one company and just create a new one.
It wasn't like that company was in financial trouble or about to go out of business. It's just they wanted to get rid of Ann Gunkel. Exactly. And probably go face to face with any one or maybe two or maybe even all four of them.
That's what I heard.
She could get in there. Well, she was a successful businesswoman who was very wealthy.
Yeah, she was in the hotel business or something before.
Yes.
Yeah, before this.
And so, she and Ray were a power couple.
Right.
He had this really profitable wrestling company, and she had her successful her endeavors in the hotel business, and looked like $1 million. Ray was a nice looking man. Was in terms of celebrity, was famous. She was well known and had a great reputation in her line of work. So they were really a power couple. And for these guys to come in there, Ann, and I'm not trying to be a snob here. Sometimes I can't help it. But Ann, I don't know what her background was, educational wise. I'm sure she had some kind of business. Mm-hmm. If not in college, I'm sure she had more education than Fuller and Welch and Graham put together, as far as like college or whatever. And a lot of people say, you don't need that. It's just the school of life will give you all the experience you need. Yeah, but usually it takes a lot longer, and you have to make all the mistakes that college, say for example, getting an MBA, you'll make a Master of Business Administration. What you learn in your two years of college to gain that, it might take you 10 years of hard lessons out in the real world.
And doors are opened a little quicker too with that college degree and the background and whatnot.
Yeah.
So Ann was quite a fighter, though, for as beautiful as she looked on the outside. Jody Hamilton recalls she was just as I don't want to say nasty on the inside, but if you poked the bear, Ann Gunkel she held her ground. Let's put it that way. And as you said, you would not be shocked that, she would be able to go in there and take on all four of those guys. Not physically, but certainly in a verbal joust.
Julie said if you crossed her, she was led doubt to the validity of your birth, as whether in other words, he called her a bastard, or say you have illicit relations with your mother.
And you know where that goes. Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
You know what that one is.
I thought that was very eloquently put by Jody. I saw that in his book when I was reading the Georgia War part of his book again.
Yeah, well, you don't want to put those curse words in there, really. Yeah, Ann was. I met her one time. In fact, Ted Turner introduced her to me.
Imagine that.
And it was nice. She's very pleasant.
It's funny. Ted Turner comes into the story here as well.
Oh, yeah.
He comes, these guys are working in Atlanta, and, they're going to be airing on Ted's original channel, which was pre-TBS. I think it was WTCG, but it was still Channel 17, guys. The younger people, they don't, what are you talking about, Channel 17? What's a channel? But anyways, I was looking through there, and Ted Turner, I guess he went to the boys, the male promoters, and said, can't you guys try to get along with Ann and try to work this thing out? And it just, it never happened. They didn't want to get along with Ann because from what I was reading, they didn't get along with Ray. They didn't like Ray Gunkel, the Fullers, the Welches, and everybody else involved in this whole, I guess you could call it a hostile takeover of sorts. Although, do you really take out? Well, I guess they did because they created their own company. But Ann wasn't going to sit idly by and let it happen, Bob. She said, nuh-uh, we're going to keep going, power ahead. And she's running her own thing. So that begins the Georgia War, 2 promotions in the state of Georgia. And It's somewhere around that time that Ann starts kicking their tail for a little bit, taking a lot of the talent, the announcers, everything with her, and leaving the other boys with not a whole lot. So what happens in the NWA when you get in that kind of trouble? They begin to make phone calls. Yep. And in comes the troops. They come in from near and far, all the other territories, sending their big hitters in, the heavy hitters, to try and build up the house, boost the ratings, if you will. And that's what happens here in Georgia. They start sending everyone they can to work against Ann Gunkel, and then they make that epic call to the guy by the name of Jim Barnett. Barnett, my boy, he is no stranger to doing things like this, coming in and helping. He had the power, Bob. He knew people, right? Not just in wrestling, but in the world itself. And he had the money and the power to come in and aid these guys in running this takeover.
Yeah, Barnett was connected. I told in the past about in 72 when Richard Nixon was inaugurated for a second term, Barnett was on the reviewing stand, not out in the audience. He was on the reviewing stand behind the president being sworn in.
Crazy.
And he was in front of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So he was a big hitter. I looked it up, and he was obviously he was someone who was a campaign donor. He gave him a lot of money, but he had a position as a result of it. He had something to do with the arts. He was an advisor through the Department of the Interior, I think. So he was actually connected to the government. I'm not sure if he was a paid position. What he had was a connection. So he could be compared to someone like Eddie Graham or Buddy Fuller. Now, those guys were heavy hitter. Eddie was, anyway, were heavy hitters within the wrestling business. But Barnett's influence extended far past that. So, think about it. Here is an effeminate, in terms of description, is considered a queen in terms of his being gay. Effeminate, small, always looked like $1 million, dressed very well coiffed, hair done nicely, right. Fingernails polished and all that. But, he's in a pro wrestling. You're talking about the most supposedly masculine, which is ironic because all these great big brutes are in thrall. They're all, at that time, they were all basically slaves in a gilded cage. But like you talked about all the troops coming in, I don't care what a guy's political or rationale might have been for one of the boys at that time about going and working against Gunkel, because whether they agreed or had sympathy with her idea or not, and for the guys working for her, we're all being threatened. You'll never work again, all this kind of crap.
Yeah, blackballed, right, blacklisted.
Blackball. You're going to be blackballed, of course. But they were all being threatened. You're going to be blackballed by that. And you know what? I'd be curious to learn. I wish that some of those guys, if I ever run into any of those guys that are still around, I'm going to ask them, what did the other boys say in Atlanta that working for your competition, working for Fuller and Paul Jones? Were those guys friendly to you? Did they talk to you? Or did they avoid you like the plague? And my guess right now is that they would avoid them. They wouldn't talk to them at all.
You've had that experience. You talked about only Carl Cox talking to you during that invasion or takeover, if you will. What was that? Was that in Knoxville or San Francisco?
Well, both. I did one in San Francisco.
Yes.
I did. I didn't do it. People came to me and said, "You're running this thing. Why don't you just take it? Or why don't we help you take it, and then we will all get a part of the fight."
So you get blamed for these hostile takeovers or attempts at such things, but here we are, and you guys out there, you listeners out there, tell me what this is. A bunch of big bad men coming into a room. There's somebody who owns 41% of stock in a company, and these guys are sitting around a table, and they say, you know what? We don't like the guy that used to own the stock, and now that he's passed away, this lady, she don't know what she's doing. She can't be a part of professional wrestling, running a company. How that's impossible. A woman to run a wrestling company. Now we'll just quote unquote shut it down and create a new company here right now. And that's what they try to do. And Ann Gunkel not going to sit idly by, like I said, and take that. She continues to run her own thing. And of course she gets with Ted Turner. I can see why. There's a lot of pictures of Ted Turner and Ann Gunkel together. I'll put it that way. And I'm not trying to start anything, guys. I'm just saying. Yeah, so Ted Turner was fond of Ann Gunkel, and he gave her, she had her TV show on his station, but so did the NWA. At one point, I believe they ran back-to-back, which is just insane. But Ann's product was a little different because they kept that studio wrestling for the NWA boys. Of course, that was invented by Jim Barnett up in Indianapolis, studio wrestling. So they continue to do that, but Ann Gunkel's show, a little different. Coming to you from an arena, so it had that bigger feel, big fight feel out there, and so that was kind of cool to look and see. Now, there was at some point during this period, Ann went to Sam Muchnick, who at the time was the quote-unquote president of the NWA, and she tried to work out a deal to join the NWA. Hey, I'd like my promotion. We're doing okay. I'd like to join the NWA, and Sam tells her, well, in his own way, he says, well, we can't have two promotions in the NWA running the same cities, so I can't allow you to join the NWA. That was Sam's way of doing things. But as time went on, there was a lot of shenanigans involved. Like you said, guys were getting threatened, blacklisted. You're not going to work in any other territory because back then you work somewhere 6 months, maybe a year if you're really getting over, but then you need to move on. So it's great to work for Ann for, say, a year, but what happens at the end of that year? You can't go anywhere, or at least that's what you're being threatened with. So a lot of guys are afraid to work for Ann, and as time goes on, she starts making calls. Vern, can I use some of your guys? Nope, I don't want any part of this, says Vern Gagne. Vince Sr. didn't want any part of it, but Bruno Sammartino, she actually got Bruno to agree to come work a big show down there for her, and on the very day Bruno was to take the flight, Vince Sr. and Cowboy Bill Watts take Bruno into an office and convince him at the very last moment not to get on that plane. And Bruno, and it's so very uncharacteristic for a guy like Bruno Sammartino, you hear the stories of what a stand-up guy he was. He literally listens, and he does not get on that flight, and her show, gets booed out of the building because she promised this big matchup, and it's not there. They couldn't deliver it. And unfortunately, this is another ploy, and it's just because these other promoters, even though they weren't necessarily in the NWA, they still didn't want any part of any of this. Yeah, well,
Gunkel, her example created a serious problem for all of them. If she could just regardless of how her company got started, now standalone company, when the poor boys in the room, took her company off the board and just made it disappear. They changed her name to Ann Who. When she ended up starting her own business, she created a terrible, the worst kind of example, because Vern Gagne and Bill Watts and Roy Shire and anybody else promoting, and in fact, Vince McMahon. None of those guys had any kind of charter agreement with any kind of legal, SEC or the State Licensing Gaming Commission. None of those guys had a license to do business as a separate entity. Now, there was stock in the companies, but it wasn't public stock. Now, that's changed, but at the time, there wasn't any company that was owned by stock investors. People, they issued stock for the public where the public could buy it, and anybody who had any smarts, even if they did that, they would never sell more than like 48% of the stock so they could keep a controlling interest and never be voted out. Yeah, so they had to worry about the same thing happening to them. If Gunkel could get away with it and thrive, if she succeeded, and say 2 or 3 years later, they did have 2 promotions in there, or horror over horror, she won out, and she actually won the battle, and she was running in Atlanta, and WCW went out of business. What a horrible example that is to encourage everybody else to do it. If they can do it in Atlanta, if a woman, my God, back then, I mean, we didn't have the ERA yet. We didn't have women's rights yet. If a woman back in the the 80s can do it, why can't men or other women, strong women, why can't they do it too? And let's look at some of these other promotions. And every one of those guys, they didn't have any kind of license that say that they owned the wrestling rights. It was only given through the NWA, which they were all part of. They were the NWA. It's like an owner voting on things. Supposedly, it's to benefit his own company, and he's supposedly voting as an impartial person, but he's voting for the benefit of his own company. No, that's not being impartial. Okay, well, let's move on.
Yeah, so I'm just looking at some of the results here for the NWA during this period, like when Ann Gunkel's really trying to run hard against them. And like we talked about, they bring in the big names, right? So Bill Watts, Dory Funk Jr., Fritz Von Erich, Fred Blassie's even coming through here. This is not the first time they would do this, and it's certainly not the last time they will do this. Anytime somebody tries to run an upstart promotion up against an NWA territory, in come the troops. And I'm looking at the names here, and I see we talked about Ann couldn't get anybody from the AWA or the WWF. She couldn't even get anybody from Dick the Bruiser's territory up there in Indianapolis. So, right. And Wilbur Snyder had been a good friend of Ray Gunkel, and he was working up there. He had a piece of that Indiana territory as well. And even he said, Ann, I can't be a part of this. And so Barnett, now part of the NWA Georgia territory, he's going to come in and he's going to try all of his little political things and power moves. He's going to try to strong-arm Tom Renesto, who was the booker for Ann Gunkel. He's going to try to strong-arm him into leaving the company by suing him for various ridiculous reasons. None of it works, and Renesto sticks around. So I'm looking at this, and the tricks they try to play against Renesto specifically, who was the booker, the guy that's putting the shows together, it's kind of interesting. It makes you think just how good of a booker Tom Renesto must have been that they feared him that much.
Oh, well, yeah, he was, first of all, they were doing well in their shows. They were drawing money. Mm-hmm. And Tom was a great booker. He booked in Florida when I was there, and I got to know him, and, he knew what he was doing. He and Jody Hamilton were great as the assassins, and, they worked, they had such heat as heels. He knew how to create heat. And in my mind, we talked about this philosophy earlier when we were talking about Dusty Rhodes. It's great to have someone like Dusty, but if you don't have someone for Dusty to beat, even he will quit drawing after a while, because it's like nothing new. There's no real impetus to get people to come see him do the same thing over and over again and just, clean up the map with somebody. Mm-hmm. So you had to build heat. You had to have some heels out there, at least one, that has some serious heat. And Tom knew how to do that. He used Thunderbolt Patterson, and I think they sold out 3 or 4 months in a row. Well, I'm not sure who Bolt was working against, but it had to be somebody. It might have been Tom, for all I know, but they had to be somebody who had some serious heat. So he knew how to do it, and plus he had the benefit of doing it. It's different when you do something in a studio. Even if you do a hot angle in a studio, it's actually more effective when you do it in a house show and you're taping both. It comes across, there's less chance for fan interference in the studio show because, there's many less fans. But in the house show, you have all that electricity in the air. You have the great scene of having all the fans screaming and yelling and jumping up and down and going crazy and chairs flying or whatever. Tom I'm sure was able to produce some great stuff to put on TV because Thunderbolt was a great draw, but he didn't draw just with blacks. He drew with everybody. Mm-hmm. And so for Tom to create that interest, he had to be built, and I don't know what the cards were, but he had to be building some serious heat with whoever he had. So, and you can do it with whoever you have. It's not who it is so much as it with a Dusty Rhodes, it's who it is. But with a lot of heels, it's not who they are. It's what do you have them do? You can take anybody. We talked of as an example. We talked about Barry Orton out there in San Francisco a few shows.
Yeah.
And Barry was just, he was just not anything. He was over, but he didn't mean a lot until he turned heel by screwing Kevin Sullivan around. And all of a sudden he meant something. So that he had some heat immediately. And so later on, when I booked him, I could book him higher on the card. and he meant something. And when it was time for him to leave, to have somebody beat him also meant something. So and Barry didn't change. His work didn't change. His stature didn't change. He didn't get bigger. He didn't take a year off and blow up like Hulk Hogan did using. I heard somebody, maybe it was you, talking about superstar Billy Graham's protein powder.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Maybe Hulk was using some of that. Well, in fact, he admitted. What am I talking about? He admitted to doing it. Yeah, Hulk took the year off. Well, Barry didn't do that. Anyway, what I'm saying is Tom Ernesto in Atlanta for Ann Gunkel didn't have to have. He had some top guys. He had Ox Baker, I think. He had himself. So whoever he had, he would be able to put heat on. And by having Thunderbolt as your primary baby face in Atlanta, especially, you had one half of it already set. Now you just had to find a heel contender to beat him. But it wasn't just them alone that was going to draw. If Ann Gunkel was drawn and they were selling out, or Thunderbolt, my understanding was they sold out for like 17 weeks. They sold all their tickets.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, they were doing pretty well there for several months. Yeah.
Yeah, Tom had to be doing something right. Well, it took a while. It took a while for the former office to recover because they lost all their talent, or most of it. But they did recover. And, that having people come in, we did the same thing. We haven't gotten there yet, but a little bit. I've referred to it a number of times with Slater and different things. But when we get to Knoxville, I opened the door one day after we were doing opposition. In fact, it was during that beef with Slater. A couple guys holding me, or three guys holding me, and the door opens behind me, and I didn't know what their card was that night. We were going opposition. They had a card that night. We had a card that night. When I opened the door, and they were standing Andre the Giant. Well, he'd been on their card. So you talk about them bringing in people from all over the country. Yeah. And the funny thing is, all those boys, no matter what their personal feelings were about who was right, who was wrong, whether they should be there or not, it was just like Vern or Wilbur Snyder when they told Ann Gunkel or told Tom Ernesto, we can't help you. It's that same thing. They know if they do, they're going to have problems. They're going to have this organization called the NWA, which is like
a mafia.
Yeah, it was a business.
I think Jody relates it as a mafia too, or at least the way their behaviors were in his book. So yeah, I could see where you're getting at with that.
Promotional consideration paid for by the following.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here, curator of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, inviting you guys to listen to many of the programs here as part of the WrestleCopia brand, including, but not limited to, the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF project. You can also listen to the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories, whether it's Jamie Ward with Georgia 81, Roman Gomez with the UWF in 1986, or Gene Jackson covering Memphis in 85. 3 projects going on right now over there at Regional Wrestling. You can also listen to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. Bob goes back in time each and every week, covering not just his career, but countless stories and interactions with hundreds of wrestling names spanning his 2 decades in the business. But that's not all. You can also check out the Puro Wrestling Academy with the professor of Puro Resu, Mr. Dan Ginnity. Dan and I go back in time and cover the history of Japanese professional wrestling in the English language. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met, from Apple to Spotify, Pocket Cast, and beyond. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to our social media guys for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Plus, I'm constantly adding old school video clips and pictures from throughout wrestling history. You can follow us over on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. And why not subscribe to YouTube.com/Wrestling Grenade. And of course, now would be a fantastic time to become a WrestleCopia patron. I'm talking about that $5 all access tier over at Patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, Patreon.com/WrestleCopia, where you get so many gifts for just $5, including all of my insanely detailed show notes for every episode of The Grenade Show, Regional Wrestling, and the Monday Warfare podcast. You'll also get early access to a lot of the podcasts here on the WrestleCopia brand, where you can listen days and sometimes as much as a week earlier than the rest of the listeners. We also offer remastered versions of the earliest episodes of The Grenade Show covering the 1989 NWA project. Includes enhanced sound quality, plus new content and conversation never heard before. But that's still not all, guys. You also get at least a dozen digital downloads for your viewing and reading pleasure each and every month, plus random bonus video drops, and of course, the Patreon exclusive Watch Along series covering many past WWF and WCW events. And if that's not all, Videocasts, also now a part of Patreon. And for those who like all of their podcasts in one nice, neat little pile, the WrestleCopia Patreon also offers a Patreon exclusive Spotify account. You can actually go over to your Spotify with your WrestleCopia Patreon credentials. Instead of listening or downloading directly from Patreon, you can go over to Spotify, listen to all the latest shows, including all of the early releases. And you get all of that and so much more for just $5. No subscription, cancel anytime. Give it a try for a month, guys. I think you'll like the content that I offer, and every penny of it goes right back here into paying the bills. So if you're looking to support that next up-and-coming podcast brand, please consider making it WrestleCopia. Help me pay some of the bills to keep the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and all of the great shows here up and running for the months and the years to come.
Well, we haven't talked about it yet, but my personal involvement with this whole thing was mob-like. I was supposed to go out and break a guy's leg.
Right. Yeah. I can't wait till we get there.
Yeah. So yeah,
it's crazy stuff, man.
That's not legal.
This is insane. Well, no, a lot of this is not legal. I mean, this is a hell of a story. Somebody should write a movie about the Georgia War. I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
But
oh man.
Hey, if Iron Claw did okay, I don't see why we can't have a Georgia War, because this is just amazing stuff, because it doesn't end there, right? So we're a year and a half into this feud now between the two promotions, the NWA, and then of course Ann, for some reason, looked at as an outlaw promotion, even though she owned 40% of the stake of the NWA territory at one point. But okay. Anywho, so Jim Barnett doing what he can on his side. And by 1974, the Battle of Atlanta rages on. They change bookers. They bring Jerry Jarrett in, who by all accounts was a pretty solid booker himself, certainly for many years. And so Jerry Jarrett comes in. He takes the book for the NWA. At the same time, Jack Briscoe, I believe, is still the NWA champion. And I noticed something very strange, because we know the NWA champion, he always works, a few dates here and there for a specific territory throughout the year. However, Jack Briscoe is booked basically every month during this period. So what they're trying to do, as you can see, Bob, is just sell out the towns and keep the big names on the cards. The NWA World Champion keeps coming to town time and time again in order, again, to flush out Ann Gunkel's territory, because, hey, we've got the NWA World Champion, Jack Briscoe here, good-looking guy, great baby face, and he's coming to town basically every month because he loves you guys here in Atlanta. And they also, somewhere around this time, acquire a guy by the name of Gordon Soley. Brother. Gordon Soley, the longtime announcer for the Florida territory, comes over and begins working for Georgia in the NWA.
Yeah, they pull out all the stops. I mean, Gordon was
world champion, top-notch announcer, great booker. I mean, they are definitely bringing everything.
Yeah, especially if Gunkel was selling out. Gunkel, I want to say, with Tom Renesto doing the booking, and Thunderbolt is one of their main attractions. If they're selling out week after week, well, as every continued sellout happens, that hurts the NWA promotion. That hurts. So the other promoters, what if they started out saying, if Eddie now Eddie was a power broker at the time, but if Eddie's calling out and he's calling Shire, he's calling Pretz, he's calling Byrne, he's calling McMahon. If he's calling these people, when he first calls them, they're maybe not alarmed or they don't think anything of it. Not the idea that McMahon's going to say, "Oh yeah, sure, I'll send Bruno down next week, no problem." He would say, "Well, I'll send you somebody. I'll send you some guy. I'll send you somebody," but they're not going to send their top people. But after they sell out for 3 or 4 months, all of a sudden these other promoters are going, "Wait a minute, these people are setting a horrible example here. This is an outlaw promotion that's getting over."
Yeah,
and
that's not allowed.
So as their success continued, the pressure Eddie Graham would be able to put on all these other promoters. Hey, look, these guys are doing well. You want to have. Eddie might even say, "Hey, I hear they're getting ready to expand. They're going to take their show on the road. They're going to be up in your territory next." Who knows what he would say? He'd say whatever he needed to say, but he would be able to put the fear of God into people. The opposition cards to Gunkel's opposition, I should say, she was considered opposition, but the opposing cards to Gunkel would get stronger and stronger until they finally had enough talent. And another thing is, you had to get some people over. If most of the main talent went with Gunkel, like Ernesto and whoever your main baby faces and heels, most of them went with Gunkel. Well, that probably takes, like the old company, I don't remember what it was called, but let's say WCW, it's what it became. If Fuller's company had lost most of its talent, okay, even when you bring new people in, you got to get somebody over, because you can bring all the attractions in the world, right. But if there's no personal angle, if there's no feud at all, it's just okay. Let's bring in Andre. We'll do a big battle royal, but your other main event, you don't have a major like Dusty against Superstar Billy Graham or something where there's a feud going.
Right.
You don't have really the kind of card that can go against one that's got Thunderbolt on top and a serious angle and whatever attractions. Tom Renesco could put on a battle royal too. So maybe have some, whoever in there. So yeah.
I was reading here in Jody's book too. He said you talked about those sellouts of something like 17 weeks in a row, over 4 months, I know. And he said they really felt like they had the NWA on the ropes, but here by 1974, it felt like Ann Gunkel was the one on the ropes, losing talent left and right, not able to bring new people in, while the NWA was thriving on bringing in talent from all of their different cities and things of that nature. So this is where Ann, starts to feel on the losing end of things. As Ronnie Garvin eloquently put in an interview he did, he said, "Jim Barnett was the man with the money and the troubleshooters. If there's a problem somewhere, he always came in and squashed it. He was known to do that for many years." And that's basically what we're talking about here, what Jim Barnett would do. And he's doing it from every way, shape, and form. And there's another way he's going to try here. We'll get to that in just a moment here with you. But I'm looking at this here. As Jerry Jarrett, I got an excerpt from a comment Jerry Jarrett made about this. He said that contrary to talks, a lot of people speculated that Tom Ernesto at some point sold out and was working against Ann while working in her office, kind of a mole type deal here, where he was purposely tanking the promotion in order to help the NWA. Now, Jody and other people have said that's absolutely not the case. If you knew Tom, simply not the case. But Jerry Jarrett, who was booking for the NWA at the time, he said that Buddy Fuller, Eddie Graham, Lester Welch, and Jim Barnett, they all personally told Jerry Jarrett separately, do not mess with Tom Ernesto, do not mess with Ann Gunkel on the TV and things of that nature, because they all had fear of one man. And that man had all of the power, technically, and that guy was Ted Turner. He was their TV.
Right. Yep. Oh, yeah. Whatever Ted said. Ted suggesting something is like a direct order from someone else. Ted said, "Yeah, I'd kind of appreciate it if you would not do anything real hostile with Ann Gunkel. That would be like you and me saying, 'Hey, don't put your hands on my kids.
Right.
I'll kill you.'" At the same time, Ted had a soft spot for the Georgia Championship Wrestling, the old company, the one, but then Gunkel had been one of the main factors in that company. And making her TV. Ray had been running things. Buddy Fuller, like we talked about a few minutes ago, Buddy Fuller had come in. He bought in, and the fact that Ray Gunkel's partner sold out without actually coming to Ray and saying, "Hey, you want to buy my share?"
Right.
Offered to Ray that he was selling out, gives me the impression that maybe there was some heat there. And here's the deal: if Ray Gunkel was the one running the office, and his partner, I forgot what his name was, but if his partner was not in the office every day, well, when the money comes in every day, when the money coming into the accounts, who's handling it? And that's Ray. That would be Ray Gunkel. So no matter what happens, no matter how much money you get when you're a partner, you're going to assume you're not getting. It's just the way it goes. You're going to assume that you're not getting all you got coming to you. Very seldom are the silent partners satisfied unless they have somebody in the office who's looking out for them,
right.
Who's like their head man, and even that person can be bribed by the opposition. So anyway, the partner sold out, and but Ted Turner, he had a lot of affection for that wrestling company because his little TV station before he went, he got the satellite. His company the wrestling kept him in business.
Right. Yeah. For many years, he appreciated that and respected that. He even bought the company eventually. So Ted Turner had a hell of an affection for the Georgia Championship Wrestling, later the World Championship Wrestling Company, because, like you said, it put him on the map, and it really helped him survive through those years of the 1970s and whatnot until they went big. Obviously, and Ted's going to take off with the CNN and whatnot. But man, I'm looking at all of this stuff here, and it all comes down to the latter half of 1974. Ann starts running against the NWA in November of 72. And by November of 74, she sees the writing on the wall. She gets a phone call. I think it was from Jim Barnett, and she finally agrees to sell. She still winds up getting some cash out of all of this, I guess, at the end of the day. But unfortunately, it didn't work out the way she wanted it to after 2 years here. And so November 1974 marks the end of the Georgia War. But some interesting stuff happens right before that. And we're going to get into that in just a minute. But before we do, because we were talking off air briefly, you were talking about Thunderbolt and Jim Wilson. You didn't know where Jim Wilson was working, and there's a reason why we were talking about that off air, guys. We'll get to that in a minute. And that was because during the fall here, not only is Ann Gunkel trying to run business on her side, not only is the NWA running, but Thunderbolt Patterson kind of pulls a Baba or an Inoki, if you will. Hey, I'm bigger than this company. I'm going to go run my own thing. And he creates the IWL along with Jim Wilson, and they actually run a show in the Omni, I believe it was around October of 74. So we've got almost three promotions at the same time running here. Just insane. Is there enough talent to go around? That just sounds crazy.
It does. Thunderbolt might have thought that, his name alone would guarantee a sellout or a big house. And I don't know. Do you know how he did when they ran the Omni?
They did not do so hot. There was you tried to start out of the gate running a show in the Omni. It's probably not a great idea.
No.
But Thunderbolt and company, Jim Wilson wrote a book later on too. And he put a lot of court stuff, documents, or not just from this period, but from the 1980s when they tried to do it again in Atlanta in the early 80s, I believe 1981. So, yeah, they didn't learn from this one, but they don't do so hot. The IWL doesn't really take off, and it's pretty much kibosh right out of the gate. Again, because of the boys from the NWA, because of Jim Barnett. At least that's what they say. So definitely you don't want to screw with the NWA, especially when they're running strong here. Even Ann Gunkel has to sell out at this point by the fall of 74. But before the fall, well, we look at the latter half of the summer here. Bob Roop going to leave Australia, and you come to the state of Georgia, and it looks like you're going to pop in. The first result I have for you is September 21st, Bob. It's going to be you teaming with Irish Pat Barrett, taking on the Andersons, Ole and Gene. So it begins right away. But you talked about your time here with me off air prior, and I wanted you to share it with everyone else here, the reason you believe you were brought in and some of the stories and the things that happened with you while you were there.
First of all, I looked up that stuff about an hour before you and I got on the air today. I was surprised. I didn't realize I'd been there that long. I was also surprised at the level of where I was booked. I was booked against the Andersons with two or three, with Mr.
partners.
Wrestler number 2 with Rocky Johnson.
Yeah, you also work the Garvins and the original Hollywood Blondes, Jerry Brown and Buddy Roberts. So you're in a lot of tag team matches. Looks like a lot of squash singles matches for TV, but what I can tell in the house shows, lots of top-level tag matches.
Well, and not only that, but we're going over at times.
You're teaming with Rocky Johnson, Mike McCord, the future Austin Idol. So Bobo Brazil. Wow, Bob Roop and Bobo Brazil over Ole and Gene Anderson. My God, what in Atlanta. I love it. Yeah,
and, I'm looking back now, and I'm blending the mentality I had at that time. I'm kind of going back to where I had at that time, and in order to do that, I have to put like 50, 60 years of experience in a little box and ignore it to go back to the mentality I had at that time. Because at that time, I didn't appreciate what was happening. I didn't look at the matches and say, well, wow, I'm up here, I'm pretty high on the card and all that. For some reason, it just seemed like another night at the office, another day at work. But I look at these matches and it looks to me like I was a main eventer because I was getting booked in these main events, or at least they had to be up high on the card because the Andersons were over. Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised to see that, but I wasn't brought in as a talent, though. That became clear before too long.
Yeah, you were telling me a little bit about that before we got on the air today, and I was hoping you would share that with everybody. I don't know how long into this run. You said you kind of recall it being the night you worked Bunk Harris, that the situation you're going to tell. And so I see here in Atlanta, you worked Bunk on September 27th. Now, I can't pinpoint as the exact date because I don't have full results for every day you worked here while you were in Georgia, but it looks like it may have been that evening that this transpired. But I wanted you to please share that story with everyone, your dealings with Jim Barnett backstage, and maybe I won't call him a fan, but someone sitting ringside.
Okay, well, Barnett and I knew each other. I've already told the stories about being in Australia for him twice at fairly important times. My first trip there, and then later on when Fuller was coming in. So I knew Barnett, and I'm not saying that I don't know if he liked me. I think he liked my girlfriend more than he liked me. But anyway, we're in Atlanta, and I know the guy, so we're in the dressing room. He never said a word to me ahead of time, which I wish he had. It would have been a lot more respectful because obviously he was just expecting me. But we're in the dressing room, and I'm in there with, all these heavy hitters, and that's what I remember. I looked at the guys like Wrestling Stoop, and a lot of these guys were guys that had been around. By the time I broke into business, they'd been around for 10 or 15 years. So they were guys that were, they were more experienced, and they were old hands. But now I'm a newcomer to their class, so I kind of felt that way too. But, in front of all these people, Barnett's holding court. He's got everybody's attention before the show starts, like an hour ahead of time or whatever. So in front of everybody, he said, Bob Roop, Jim Wilson is sitting out there in the audience. He's been coming to our shows and sitting out in the audience. Would you go up there and invite him in the ring and deal with it? By him doing that in front of everybody, embarrassed me because he put me on the spot without giving me any warning whatsoever. And I just told him, I told Barnett in front of all these guys, I said, Jim, I know Jim Wilson. I said, I'm not saying he's a friend, but I do know him. He's an acquaintance. And I said, if I go in the ring, if he says anything to me, or if he challenges me, if he stands up or anything, if he makes any kind of attention to himself, then I'll invite him in the ring. But if he doesn't, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. And so what was Barnett going to say? He realized he'd made a mistake by doing that. So that was all I heard about from in the dressing room. But later that night, Ken Patera was on the card that night. And Ken and I were, I don't know, buddies, but we were both Olympians, so we had kind of a bond that way. But Ken was out watching my match with Bunk Harris, and Barnett came out on the stage, and Barnett said to him, and Barnett did this on purpose. He knew Ken would tell me.
Right.
Telephone,
telegraph, telewrestler.
Yeah. So he said to Ken Patera, he says, I don't know what that Bobby Roop is even doing here. So what he was telling.
You do a good Jim Barnett. Oh, my boy.
Just don't call me sir. So Ken, of course, told me, and I realized, I'm sure I gave my notice.
So what did Ken say exactly?
He said, Barnett said, what do you, he wondered what you were doing here. Well, that's my notice. I mean, Barnett's running the show.
So Barnett basically goes to Ken, I don't even know what that guy's doing here. So he's already fed up with you because you're not here to do what he wanted you to do. You're here to wrestle.
Well, I'm sure he probably called Eddie Graham and said, Eddie, what did you do? You ruined me. I embarrassed myself in front of all the boys because you told me Roop would shoot for you. He would do whatever I wanted. He wouldn't do it. Well, I didn't care about that. By that time, I was disillusioned with Graham anyway.
So this is actually taking place, this situation, because you said you weren't really sure why Jim Wilson was sitting in the crowd, because you said he had done this several times in recent weeks.
Right.
And this is leading right into that big show he's going to do with Thunderbolt at the Omni himself, with the IWL, the promotion they're trying to do. So maybe it's just he's just kind of there trying to promote his show by, you know how that works. Going and sitting sitting front row at another promotion's shows.
I did that. I did that myself later on. But I'm trying to put my own head mentality into what Wilson and Thunderbolt could have been thinking by having him there. What's the best case scenario that Wilson gets in the ring? I don't know. Maybe he had a box cutter in his pocket or a brass knucks or something. The best advertising in the world for this show would be for me to get Jim Wilson in the ring. All he'd have to do is duck and dodge, pull out the box cutter or whatever, and I'd back off. I wouldn't try to take him down if you got a box cutter in his hand. I'd maybe go get the ring bell or something. And then
but he wouldn't have left that place in great shape had he done something like that between whatever type of police you guys had and the boys, I would imagine as well. Once we get him backstage, right?
Well, maybe that would be even part of the plan. See, I don't know what it was. We're speculating here. But a part of the plan, what Jim Wilson might count on to protect him would be the cops. They would keep him from getting killed. Or not killed, but I'm pretty sure I could.
So it would have been more, and again, like you said, pure speculation here, because I don't think Jim Wilson's trying to come in there and have a shoot with you. I mean, he would be a fool if he was. But at the same time, you think maybe it was just kind of acknowledge me, I'll stand up, I can do some pointing and shouting till the cops get in between us. Yeah, so publicity for their upcoming big event. I get it. So, I mean, that's good business sense, I guess, at the end of the day. I mean, trying to get free publicity, and no better way to do that than to show up at the NWA events. So that happens, and is your mind made up basically that night that you're done, or it's after Ken Patera tells you what Barnett said?
I don't know if Kenny told me that night or not, but as soon as I heard it, and Barnett really turned me off by what he did. He was the boss. He was the guy that, he made it clear he was in charge. To my mind, he insulted me by treating me like a stooge, like I would go out there and just do what he wanted. Mm-hmm. So that offended me, and I saw the lay of the land, and I don't know, maybe I didn't like it there.
So Barnett uses every trick in the book when he comes into the territory to run Ann Gunkel out of business, and she's on the ropes. She's days away from selling out, and she really has no option. But now here comes Thunderbolt and Jim Wilson, and they're going to try to do their thing next. They see Ann. She might be running out of, I don't know about running out of money, but she's running out of opportunities to make this thing work. So they're like, all right, we're going to do our thing next, and we're going to take our turn at trying to compete against the NWA. And this time, Barnett calls on physicality as a way to maybe persuade these guys not to run against him, because he's got in mind that you're going to go in there, you're going to call out Jim Wilson, and there's going to be some sort of a shoot in the ring at this point in time. I guess that's what Jim was expecting. That doesn't come to fruition. I'm assuming Jim Wilson doesn't even get involved. Does he even acknowledge you?
No,
is he even aware that you're being sent out there to cause issue with him? Okay, so Jim Wilson's just sitting there minding his own business throughout this.
I saw where he was before I went out there, and I didn't even look at it. If he came in the ring, I kept my eye in that direction, but I didn't think he'd be crazy enough to run in the ring. But I mean, he'd have to be out of his mind, because we'd all attack him. Right. Even Bob Harris pull that toilet paper out of his tights long enough to
stick it in his mouth.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what they had planned. You telling me that the timing, which is all new to me as of today, really, of Gunkel going out of business and when Thunderbolt and Jim Wilson did their thing, maybe Bolt, the reason he went, not opposition, but went off on his own, was maybe that he saw the end of the road. The end of the line was coming up. And they were, once that happened, they weren't going to be on TV any longer. So he was trying to make hay while he still had some exposure, where he was still well known.
Yeah, I know the story. I've read specifically, I covered the IWL, the 74 and the 81 version on an old episode of the Territory podcast that I do. And I don't remember everything off the top of my head, but I remember Jim Wilson's book, him stating that they had some sort of a money backer that was supposed to come in there and help them, and they really didn't do what they promised. Imagine that. Never heard that story before. And unfortunately, things fall apart, and they never really take off the way they had planned. So I don't know that it was going to work out at all. If Ann Gunkel couldn't do it with what she had walking in, I don't know that anybody else was going to do it from the bottom, work their way up. Outside of having a name, okay, Thunderbolt Patterson's on the card, but what else you got? So. Right. Yeah.
Well, Ann being a businesswoman, I'm sure that when she got to into the law of declining returns, in other words, they'd had some success. I think one of the things they lost was the supporting towns. So Atlanta was their only, for Gunkel I'm talking about, Atlanta was the only show that they could count on for income.
Yeah, so I believe they were left with a lot of the small spot towns outside of Atlanta. Yeah. Right.
And depending on how they're doing, I don't know if she had the wherewithal to do we talked about local promoting. I think we gave our audience a lesson with our talk about California local promoters and odd references in other places of the local promotion. If she didn't have that, then those towns may or may not do well. Some of those small mountain towns, if you don't get the posters up on the telephone poles or in the shop windows, you don't draw because people don't know about it. But and my opinion was, as a businesswoman, if she got in the law of diminishing returns, where they were going downhill financially, and she could see that she was going to have to be putting her own personal assets into keeping the company going, I can see her making a decision to sell out and try to get some kind of profit out of it. She had dug in her heels and kept 2 years, right?
Yeah, 2 years.
2 years she went opposition to an alliance of a trust, basically, an alliance of people colluding against her illegally. You're not supposed to try to have a monopoly on a business. She held her own for 2 years. You got to take your hat off to her, and to Tom Ernesto. And Tom was booking down in Florida at the Imperial Room one night. I very seldom, in fact, I don't remember ever seeing him again. But one night I went in there after a show. We all went there after a show in Tampa. And one night I went in there, I don't know, say 11 o'clock. Tom was sitting by himself at the bar. They had a bar at one end of the building. The stage for the entertainment was at the other end. There was a singer, a group on the stage, and they were playing. Tom was sitting at the bar by himself, and so I went over and sat down next to him, just to chat. I liked him, and I was in my prime then. I was young, and I was just starting to really understand the business, enjoy it. I was over. My matches were good. I was enjoying life. And it showed, in my attitude and the way I looked good. I had my weight down. And so I walked in and we were just talking. And he said something to me that I've always remembered. He said, "Bob," he said, "I want to tell you," he said, "the next 10 years are going to go so quick for you. You just won't believe it." And I thought about that because about 10 years later, I thought, you know what? I remember Tom telling me that 10 years ago. Yeah. And it seems like it's only been a couple of years, and it's now 10 years later, and he was so right. So he was giving me an old-timer's advice, realization on his part. And, after what he'd gone through, And I didn't know his background up there in Atlanta. I didn't know he'd done that. So knowing that now, I can see how he would be, I don't want to say the word jaded, but disillusioned again by what disillusioned me. That you go opposition and all of a sudden, it's not just the promoters, but the talent, the workers. The workers class turn against you too.
Right.
They won't talk to you in public. It's very disillusioning, especially for someone like Tom, who had he and Jody have and still do have tremendous respect. They were, to me, they weren't just the best match tag team. They were the best as far as heat getting. They were better than anybody, including the Andersons, as far as I know. They were terrific. They guys were just terrific, and they had no fear. They guys had, you talk about having guts or balls. Those guys, no fear.
Right.
They got chased out of town at 100 miles an hour. As long as the car ran and didn't break down, they didn't have a problem with it. I thought, man, you guys are, I told Juddy, I said, man, you're nuts. He said, yeah, well, that's just the way it was, Bob. He said, we always did business.
Yeah.
We did good business that way. People knew they were going to get a show. They were going to get something out of it. So what if they chased us out of town at 90 miles an hour shooting guns? I never understood that rationale, but I respect it. And they were tough guys. Tom wasn't like a fighter per se.
Sure.
But he was tough. He had a backbone.
You had to be to exist
yeah.
in that world back in that time period, and especially working some of the territories they did down in the South. My God.
Oh,
To
yeah.
get the heat that they did. Yeah, you're right. They were special people. Hey, we had to do what we had to do, and
Yeah, and they liked it. I mean, they weren't sadists or they weren't crazy. They were calculated about what they did. But
very intelligent
you know what?
guys.
They made themselves attractions because the next time they might be they might be working. Say they're in a small town. Well, maybe a week from now they're in a town that's about 30 miles away, a big city. What better way to promote your appearance a week later than to have half the people in the audience chase you out of town in their cars?
Right.
Because they're so pissed off at you. Well, they're going to come to that show 30 miles away, aren't they? Or the next time you get back in the area, you're going to have an audience want to come and see you get your butt kicked. And those guys were self-promoting. And
right.
Because neither one of them were shot or killed. I don't know how many times they got stabbed, but
that's a different story, right?
Yeah, they made it out of there alive. Well, having each other's back was a big deal.
Well, I'll tell you what, Ann must have really appreciated those guys, because when she agreed to sell, she made Barnett promise that certain guys would have jobs with the NWA office if she let them have her company. And one of them was Tom Ernesto as booker. And I believe Jody Hamilton was worked in there as well. I think she even made them give him a certain guarantee, I believe. So it's kind of interesting that they were loyal to her throughout these 2 years, and so she was loyal to a handful of her guys as well. Okay, I'll do this, but you got to take care of so-and-so here, because they were good people, and obviously no such thing as being blackballed in wrestling if you're good at what you do.
No. Well, Tom and Jody both booked in Florida after that.
Right.
In the next 10 years. I mean, well, you guys can make money? You can make money for me? I don't care what you did. Come on in. So you messed around with my wife. I can get another wife.
Yeah, I can get another wife. You're going to make me the green? All right, let's do this thing.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So,
Ann often quipped that the NWA stood for no women allowed, so that kind of makes sense.
Oh, yeah. Well, she was, I thought, class doesn't have to do with being Audrey Hepburn type genteel, feminine, ladylike. Class can be, let's just forget about gender. I think as a person, especially in a wrestling promotion, she had class. She certainly, if I was Ted Turner, I'd much rather have her come see me than Ole Anderson or Jody or anybody. And plus, she was obviously a very smart person. I don't think you'd you'll make a fortune for yourself back then as a woman in any business unless you knew what the hell you were doing.
Right.
Yeah, I have all the respect in the world for her.
Well, you talked about her being a great businesswoman, but hate and spite can be a hell of a motivation, and that's what probably kept her going here for 2 years, because she had promised Ray on Over the Grave, so the story goes, at least Ann's daughter tells the story this way, that during this whole situation, Ann went early on and told Ray over top of his gravesite that she would never let the Welches take the territory from him. So she worked hard, she fought hard, but at the end of the day, you can see, like I said, the writings on the wall, the money situation, the business situation. Sometimes you just got to do what you got to do. And Ann going to sell out almost to the very day, 2 years after she begins the war against the NWA and company, November 1974. And it's right around that time that you leave the promotion. So you're always up to something, Bob. And so you're gone basically right at the same time. The last verified match I have for you is November 1st in Atlanta. It's you and Rocky Johnson defeating the Hollywood Blondes, Jerry Brown and Buddy Roberts there. Now, I see a few more matches here for the first week of November, but I don't have results, so I can't confirm if you actually worked those shows or not. But it's likely you worked the Garvins and the Mighty Yankees tag team. So the Garvins are in here. We've run into them so many times.
Right. Wow. I'm amazed. I'm still going over. If I'm leaving, I'm surprised they didn't beat me. Back to Ann Gunkel just for a second. Think about after 2 years, think about all the money that she cost them with what she drew, what they didn't draw, what they had to do to make up just to catch up to her, and then to go ahead and beat her out, to get to finally, get down and out of business. They had to spend a lot of money. Plus, they lost a lot of money in terms of gate receipts. Because It took, I don't know how long it took them before they even became competitive in Atlanta itself. Right. Or Gunkel, I think, if they were selling out, I doubt if Gunkel was selling out in Atlanta, I doubt if Georgia was, if Welch's group was selling out too. Well, maybe they were, I don't know, but certainly not in the beginning because all the talent went somewhere else. Just think about it this way. If they had gone to Gunkel and made her a decent offer, what would happen? They would get all their talent back. The talent wouldn't be gone.
Right.
And they could go back to, they would be the ones selling out. So if they had made Ann Gunkel, at least made her an offer, or if not the offer, to include her in, on her partnership, that would have saved them a lot. See, what I'm trying to say, Frankie Kane one time, I know I'm going off on tangents. Frankie Kane said if the promoters had just paid the talent and then deducted that payment from their income taxes, they would have made money and their businesses would have been stronger too because they had boys that were happy they were getting paid like they should have been.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying, this is another example of these greedy promoters, and what did it eventually cost them? They all lost their businesses to McMahon.
I look at it from another standpoint too, and I'm just hypothesizing here. I don't know Ann Gunkel. I didn't know Ann Gunkel. I don't know anybody involved in this entire Georgia war. But I think back, and Ray Gunkel was the wrestler. Ray Gunkel was the promoter. Ann was a businesswoman. She worked in the hotel industry. Did she have any interest in the wrestling world until these guys shut her out and ripped her off? And then she said, "All right, boys, it's on. It's on now." So do you think maybe up front had these guys just sat down and said, we're not paying no, expletive here, that any money to buy her out and take her shares? They didn't even offer her that money up front. No. They just said, what? We're going to shut that company down and open a new one. And Buddy Fuller just happens to be, part of the new company that after shutting down his old one. So, yeah. And again, we go back to Bob Roop's the bad guy and trying to, run opposition. Yeah. And we can go back just a few years here and see, the Fuller Welch family doing very similar shenanigans. And it's not the only time, but it's very prominent here in the Georgia war for sure. Buddy Fuller basically saying, Ray's gone, and now I don't have any opposition to just shut this thing down. And he didn't realize Ann was going to do what she did. And she certainly gave him a run for the money. Like you said, it was a headache for a very long time there. And these guys with their ego, we're not going to let no woman beat us, rather than just trying to buy her out and do what's right business-wise, right? I mean, wouldn't that be? Do you think if it went to Ray Gunkel's brother, let's just say he had a brother, would they have done the same thing? It's kind of interesting. Lots of weird dynamics to this. Was it really just because she was a female? Was it because they hated Ray? I don't know. There's so much to look into there, and I'm going to keep diving because it's such a fascinating period in the world of wrestling. That Georgia war.
It is. It's amazing, that short-sightedness. Of looking at the immediate picture, like, okay, there's that pie right there. There might be other pies, but I don't care about that. I want this pie. I want as much of it as I can get. I don't care what happens after that. And they said, well, now if you'd have split that pie, you were going to get an unlimited supply for the rest of your life of pies. But since you hog that whole one, you don't get it anymore. Yeah, you talk about guys who are supposed to be sharp businessmen. Oh, right. My God. And Ann, the daughter's rendition about her going to Ray's grave in the rain and pounding on the headstone saying, Ray, I'm going to get there. That might not have been so much that they were disrespecting him, because I know that Ray Gunkel apparently knew Buddy Fuller and didn't trust him, even to turn his back on him and in public, because he knew Buddy. Buddy was not to be trusted. He knew that, and they were partners for 8 years. And imagine going out there in the ring. You're partners with a guy. You both come separately to the dressing room. You both get dressed in your own section of the dressing room, as far apart or distance away. You're not speaking. You don't speak to each other at all. Then you get to finish, and you get together maybe to hear what your finish is going to be, and you still don't talk. And then you go out in the ring and do your finish. After the match, you don't shake hands. You don't say good match. You just go back to your dressing room, get undressed, and leave without speaking to the other guy the whole night. Right.
Yeah, that was my understanding. These guys did not get along. They did not speak or have anything, and they're business partners on top of that. They're working together on top as tag team and as baby faces, and out there in public, they're the best of friends. But outside of that, these guys had nothing to do with each other whatsoever. And unfortunately, it leads to everything we just discussed here today on the show. Jim Barnett comes to town. He pulls every trick out of his hat. And unfortunately, at the end of the day, they win. They win the war. The Georgia War is over November 1974. Bob Roop is also leaving town in November of 74, headed back to the familiar state, brother, the Sunshine State. Back to Championship Wrestling for Florida, the Eddie Graham ran promotion. And right out of the gate, you're going to work the likes of Bob Backlund, Greg the Hammer Valentine. Man, the list, I see Bob Armstrong's name popping up here. So you got a lot of great stories to tell, I'm sure, as we continue on. Because as you go back to Florida here in November of 74, Bob, this is your home for the next 2 years. You're going to be here for quite a while. You're going to do a whole lot of things. And I can't wait to get into all of that.
Yeah, that's right. That's when I got into the office. I was booking with Harley and a couple other people for a while. That was an interesting time, because that's where I really learned the business. I think was during that time. I'd had enough experience on my own. It would be like taking undergraduate courses out on the road for five or 6 years, and then getting into a place where you're around, with Eddie Graham and Harley and all the different, anybody that came in the office, right, whether it be somebody, a visiting promoter or whatever. You usually would talk about business. You'd hear, what are you doing? What angle you got going, all that. So it was a place. You graduated from college, I graduated from undergraduate as college. Now I'm getting my master's. These are my teachers, people like Eddie Graham and Harley and all that. And yeah, what a great learning experience, sitting across the desk from Harley Race for a year, every day or 5 days a week.
Right.
What a great learning experience. Plus he was a good guy. He was fun to be around, and we respected each other and liked each other. And he was a very interesting guy.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, some great stories.
Yeah, stories for days, I am sure.
Yeah, but this is the Sour Grapes portion. If you haven't had enough of them already, I want to go back and address that one thing about you. I'm sure you're getting it too, just by the fact that you actually agreed to do this program with me. We're doing it together, so you're getting whatever blame. Actually, you're the one bringing it to people, so you might be getting more blame than I am. But all those people out there that still want to talk about Bob Roop treating Roy Shires wrong, and I'm sure it was me doing that to Roy Shires that had him go and expose the entire business to the Los Angeles Times a few years later, and tell everything about it all being fake and all that. And then also for all the other promoters that exposed the business one way or another when they were going out. And now here we have these promoters that we just talked about for an hour and a half or so. We have these wrestling promoters that are stealing from a fallen colleague, a fallen promoter,
right,
who's died unexpectedly. And we're not going to just not honor him. We're going to show respect for him by screwing his wife, and not literally, but figuratively. We're going to do everything we can. Think about what the company was maybe earning. 41% of it might have been worth a couple $100,000 a year. Now, I don't know, but if you sold it, it certainly would have been worth something.
Right.
So the idea they were just going to steal that, my God, what arrogance! And again, only in the wrestling business.
Yeah.
I can't think of any other.
Yeah, you don't hear that in anybody else. Yeah.
No, you couldn't. You just can't do that. You can't do that in other businesses, because one thing was, again, it was a monopoly. The Sherman Antitrust Act was put in effect just for monopolies. It used to be the monopoly in the oil business, was Rockefeller controlling the oil business. Well, the NWA was a monopoly also. It had 41 branches in it. Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Europe. It had branches all over.
Right.
And how many in the United States and Hawaii? You had all these members, and it represented a lot of people. In terms of the amount of people who were participants by being spectators, if you consider television and house shows alone, you're talking about multi-hundreds of millions of people. And so you talk about having something have an effect. Now that should be something that should be, don't you think that should be regulated? I think it should, but it's not. My era I'm talking about.
Right.
It wasn't regulated at all. They actually were called, the NWA was called before a Senate subcommittee or House or Senate wanted to.
It was done repeatedly. Yeah, in different territories and whatnot. Yeah, I think it was just it was pro wrestling, so I think judges really didn't know what the hell to do with it. I think especially back in that time period. But yeah, it's crazy. By definition, the NWA was a monopoly. I don't think anybody's going to argue that. Based on, again, going back to the definition of a monopoly, they certainly tried to strong hand control, blackball, whatever they had to do to keep their specific areas, their specific territories. Now,
right.
We got like 40 hamburger joints just in my city alone. Imagine if McDonald's came along and said, nobody else can have hamburgers, and they shut everybody else. It doesn't make sense. But
it doesn't work. Can I preview our Knoxville segment with a story from that era about judges not know what to do? When we did opposition in Knoxville, Ron Fuller was a promoter there, and Ron Fuller didn't take me to court. He didn't sue me. He sued Ronnie Garvin, and Ronnie Garvin. They had a contest that year. Ron Fuller did every year. One year, I think it was a car. This year it was a boat. Knoxville was there was a lake nearby. In fact, Bob Orton Jr. and I went in together and bought a boat while we were there. And it was great. You could be out on $15,000 boat, out inboard, outboard, cabin cruiser, I think is what the type they were called. It wasn't like a little outboard rowboat or anything. It was, nice big boats. But anyway, they did this boat deal, and Ronnie Garvin wanted to buy a boat. So Fuller put up the money to buy the boat, and he took the money to Ronnie in cash, so he didn't have to declare it and all that. So Ronnie bought the boat. They had the contest, and when we were in opposition, Ronnie was pulling a Buddy Fuller on Ron Fuller, because Ronnie said, well, I'm not in your promotion anymore. That $15,000 I owe you, I don't owe you that money anymore, because you know what? I'm not in your promotion anymore. So guess what? I'm not going to pay you. Well, Fuller took him to court.
Wow.
And one of the things that came out, it's hilarious. One of the things that came out under oath was that the money was delivered in a paper bag. It just says it wasn't a check. You don't have it like a cancer check. You don't have any kind of document that Ronnie Garvin signed that said you gave him $15,000 in a paper bag. It just says, I'm sorry, I cannot deal with any legal issues that involve money being transported in a paper bag. Case is dismissed. I think it's hilarious myself. Well, yeah, yes, Your Honor.
I had never heard that story before.
Oh, yes, Your Honor. There was nothing untoward about it. There was nothing wrong. There was nothing shady about it. I just always hand over $15,000 in paper bags. That's the way I carry my money.
Yeah.
What a joke. Yeah, I thought I'd share that one. I think it's funny. Ronnie, I don't know if Ronnie ever did pay him.
Well, that's one for Ron Garvin anyway, at least for the short term. That's awesome. Great story.
Yeah.
Good way to close out the show this week, Bob. I was like, I don't want to shift gears after telling that great Georgia War show, but man, that was a nice little bonus piece. I love it at the back end of the program. So,
it's a little preview of
we got so much to get into there. I can't wait to break all of that down. It's going to be a hell of a time. Everybody keeps asking, when are you getting to it? Very soon. We're working on it, guys, and it's going to be worth the wait. I promise.
Yeah, we can talk about. In fact, we can talk about all this stuff because stuff comes back to me. Things that I should correct, or maybe I will along the line. Oh, I keep forgetting to do this. July 18th to the 21st, Waterloo, Iowa. The Tragos Fez Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame has their yearly convention.
Right.
July 18th through the 21st. I'm going to be there. I sure hope that any of you listening out there can make it. Love to talk to you and get your opinion of what we're doing and show you my appreciation for you listening. But it's a great time. A lot of great talent there. All good people you'd love to run into. It's a place where fans can mingle really personally with the wrestlers.
Right.
You can really get up close and personal. So it's what I always like about it the most of all the Hall of Fames on that. I like that one the most. Anyway, I wanted to get that out there. Thank you, Ray.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Anybody who's in that area or likes to make the trip or just wants to visit some of the great stars the history of professional wrestling has produced, they're all going to be there. Lots of talent involved there with that Hall of Fame, the Tragos Fez Hall of Fame. And Bob, you're a part of that, and it's going to be cool to hear some of your stories coming out of that. You're going to run into a lot of good old acquaintances, I'm sure. So looking forward to that when the time comes. But for right now, I think we're good this week. I think we told a hell of a story. Great. I loved getting your insight because a lot of that Georgia War took place before you ever got there. In fact, it was on its deathbed by the time you arrived, honestly. But it's fun that, you've done the history lessons. You went back and you looked yourself, and I'm sure you've heard a few things over time as well. So it's kind of cool to get your take on all of that and everything that was going on. And some of the guys, you knew a lot of the guys involved, and you're not really shocked at some of the things certain people did. We won't mention their name here. Fuller, Welch. But we will we'll wind things up here this week, Bob, and we'll be back soon, guys. I believe next week is the 4th of July, and I will likely be taking the week off next week, guys. We will produce some shows. I don't know that the Wrestling Stoop is going to be able to get out on time, but stay tuned, guys. I'll keep them alerted. I told you going into the summer that we were likely going to do 3 on 1 off a month. I'm kind of trying to do a cycle with a couple of the shows so that I can get everything out in a timely manner and not, get stressed out myself, breaking the fourth wall, letting everybody know this out there. But I think we've done about 4 in a row right now. So we're rocking good. We're well into the summer, and it's probably a good week to take a day off there for the 4th of July, let everybody enjoy the holiday. Sure. So it's probably a good week to give everybody rest and kind of catch up on some of the shows. If they missed, they can go back and listen to some of the past shows that we've done. Yeah, it's a great time.
You might have somebody listening to this show today that this is the first one they listen to.
Right, yeah.
I'm hoping they'll go back to show 1, and catch up, see where we've been.
But I apologize for cutting you off. Before I forget, I've been meaning to do this for several weeks now. I want to give a shout out there to the former owner of Ring of Honor, the professional wrestling promotion. Kerry Silken has nothing but great things to say about this show. He tells me what a great job that I do on my side, so thank you, Kerry, for that. But he loves listening to your stories, Bob. He loves this show. He loves the history, the stories you tell, and everything in between. So just want to give a very special thank you for the support of Kerry Silken. He's been on board, basically, it feels like, since day one for me and my brand. He's always lending, kind words to me, and it really, boosts my morale at times when I need it. So want to thank Kerry Silken for that. And thank you so much for listening to the show. He'll repost us sometimes over there on Twitter and things. So just thank you, Kerry, for being a listener. Thank you, Kerry. I'm glad to hear that. We all like to be
be held in some kind of regard, and the idea that you like what Ray and I are doing together, it means a lot to me. We don't do this, it's not frivolous. I'm sharing my life, and Ray is using his expertise and his experience to help me, help us get it out there. We're a team. It's not like boss and employee here. Ray and I are partners in this effort. So I really appreciate, Kerry, you and everyone else out there who has that same sort of attitude. You don't have to love us, but if you're listening, I appreciate it. Whatever your reaction is. I know that I'm telling the truth as far as I know it, which isn't always 100%. A lot of times you don't know the whole story of the one you're telling, but we're doing the best we can, because one dissembling, one lie, or one obvious misstatement would detract from my credibility everywhere else. So I don't try real hard. I'm making a point not to be dishonest in any way. So, and Ray keeps me honest too. So thank you, Kerry, and everybody else out there. We really appreciate you being here with us.
Yeah, we got so many stories left to tell. You got 2 years coming up here, big years here in the state of Florida. You're going to do the heel deal. You're going to work with Steve Kern, all sorts of other goodies going on there. Of course, the Knoxville situation coming around the corner as well. You're going to go back to Georgia once again in the 1980s and work underneath Ole Anderson, who is the promoter and booker by that point in time. And then we're going to go on. You became booker once again in the Florida territory. We'll talk about that in the mid-'80s. Yeah, but we got so many names to come into, and then even the back end, you try to promote yourself. You work the global promotion in the late 80s, and then you move on and work again underneath Ole Anderson for WCW. Ted Turner led World Championship Wrestling throughout the year of 1990 into the beginning of 1991, and I'm sure we're going to come across some names in that period that's going to be very interesting to get your take on as a man working behind the scenes. You told that story a couple of weeks ago about giving orders to Sid Vicious and kind of the response you got, at least the non-response you got from Sid. So yeah, I'm sure a lot of people love that one, and I'm looking forward to, God knows what we're going to get into as we continue on here in the show. So looking forward to that. So yeah, I think we've made up our mind. We'll take the holiday off, guys, and we will be back in 2 weeks' time and ready to go with another great, exciting episode of the program. Thanks so much, Mr. Bob Roop.
Well, thank you, Ray. And again, thank you folks out there for being with us. It means a lot. Without you, we don't need to be here, or we wouldn't be. So please stay with us. We'll stick around too. Thanks again, Ray.
All right, guys, that's going to wrap things up here this week. But in the meantime and in between time, I encourage everybody to go out there and follow friend Mr. Bob Roop over at Facebook.com/PoorBobRoop. And you can find me, Ray Russell. Follow me on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. But most of all, I encourage everybody to go over to Patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, Patreon.com/WrestleCopia. So many great gifts there, including early show releases, digital downloads, video casts now available, and so much more. Check it out over at Patreon. Help support the brand. And until next time, on behalf of Bob, we ask you guys to hold tight and see where we head next time. Right here on the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop.